The noonday sun beat down on the town of Perdition with a ferocity that mirrored the cruelty unfolding in its dusty square. Men, faces hardened by the grit of the frontier and the rot of their own souls, gathered like buzzards around a makeshift platform. Upon it stood a man, Silas Blackwood, his eyes glittering with a venomous combination of greed and cheap whiskey, his voice a gravelly rasp that cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Beside him, a young woman, Ilara, stood as still as a petrified willow, her head bowed, a tattered shawl doing little to conceal the tremor that ran through her slender frame. "Step right up, gentlemen. A rare opportunity," Blackwood bellowed, his arm gesturing with a flourish towards Ilara. "A fine specimen, hard-working, and best of all, completely docile. Blind as a bat, this one won't give you no trouble, won't see what she ain't supposed to," he punctuated his claim with a cruel laugh that scraped the raw nerves of decency. Elias Thorne, a rancher whose solitary life was etched into the lines around his kind eyes and the quiet strength of his posture, stood at the edge of the assembly. He had come to Perdition for supplies, not for a spectacle of human degradation. His heart, a place long accustomed to the ache of a past sorrow, the loss of his beloved Mary and their unborn child years ago, clenched with a fresh, sharp pain. He watched Ilara, her face pale and smudged, her lips pressed into a thin line of endurance. There was a nobility in her suffering, a quiet defiance in the way she held herself against the tide of jeers and lewd comments that rippled through the onlookers. He saw not the specimen Blackwood hawked, but a soul drowning in an ocean of despair. The bidding began, a grotesque parody of commerce, each offer a nail hammered into the coffin of Ilara's dignity. Elias felt a righteous anger, cold and clear, rise within him. This was not about want or need, it was about the fundamental wrongness of one human being claiming ownership over another. He thought of his ranch, Havenwood, a sanctuary he had painstakingly built, a place of peace and growth. It was a stark contrast to this pit of depravity. As the bids climbed, fueled by liquor and malice, Elias stepped forward. His voice, calm but carrying an undeniable authority, cut through the squalor. $100 silver, he stated, his gaze fixed not on Blackwood but on Ilara, a silent promise in his eyes. A hush fell over the crowd. It was a significant sum, more than any they were willing to part with for what they considered damaged goods. Blackwood's eyes widened, then narrowed with avarice. 100, do I hear 110? He croaked, but the challenge died in his throat as he met Elias's unwavering stare. This was not a bid for chattel, it was a declaration. Sold. Blackwood finally yelled, slamming a grimy hand on the platform. To the quiet man in the back. He roughly shoved Ilara forward. "She's all yours, mister. And mind you, no refunds if her blindness ain't to your liking." Elias ignored the snickering. He moved towards the platform, his steps measured. He reached Ilara, extending a hand not in possession but in assistance. She flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but her own hand, trembling, rose to meet his. Her fingers were cold, her grip surprisingly strong, like a drowning swimmer clinging to a lifeline. He gently helped her down, his touch respectful, a stark contrast to the brutality she had clearly known. He pressed the coins into Blackwood's eager palm without a word, the transaction feeling like a necessary evil to achieve a greater good. He knew this act, this purchase, would be twisted by gossiping tongues, but the truth of his intent resided in his own heart. He was not buying a slave, he prayed, offering a chance at salvation, a path out of the darkness that had nothing to do with her purported lack of sight. As he led Ilara away from the jeering crowd, a profound silence enveloped them. The dust of perdition seemed to cling to them, a residue of the ugliness they were leaving behind. Ilara walked beside him, her steps hesitant, her head still bowed, the illusion of blindness meticulously maintained. Elias felt the immense weight of his decision, the responsibility heavy on his shoulders. What had he truly done? Could he offer this broken spirit a genuine haven? The path ahead was uncertain, shrouded in the mysteries of her past and the challenges of her healing. But as they cleared the last hovel of perdition and the vast, open plains stretched before them towards the distant promise of Havenwood, a fragile seed of hope and almost forgotten sensation began to stir within Elias Thorne's lonely heart. The wind picked up, whispering through the tall grasses, carrying away the stench of the town and perhaps, just perhaps, the first echoes of despair from Ilara's captive soul. The journey to Havenwood Ranch was undertaken in a profound, almost unbroken silence, a stark contrast to the cacophony of Perdition Square. Elias Thorne drove the buckboard, the rhythmic creak of the wheels and the steady plod of the horses the only constant sounds against the vast, whispering expanse of the prairie. Ilara sat beside him, a still, small figure wrapped in her worn shawl, her face turned resolutely forward, her unseeing gaze fixed on some point beyond the horizon. Elias respected her silence, understanding that words would be hollow things against the enormity of what she had endured. He made no attempt to pry, no effort to force a connection that could only grow organically if it were to grow at all. He observed her, though, with quiet concern. Her hands, when they weren't clutching the shawl, were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white. She navigated the bumps and ruts of the trail with a curious stillness, never reaching out to steady herself, a detail that pricked at the edge of Elias's awareness. He had seen blind folk before. They often developed an acute sense of their surroundings, using their other senses to compensate. Elara seemed different, but he pushed the thought aside. Trauma manifested in myriad ways. As dusk began to paint the sky in hues of bruised purple and soft rose, the distant, welcoming lights of Havenwood appeared. The ranch was nestled in a gentle valley, cradled by low, rolling hills, a testament to years of hard work and Elias's deep love for the land. It was a place of order and quiet beauty. As they approached, a figure emerged from the main house, a lantern held aloft. Martha Gable, his housekeeper and confidant for over a decade, a woman whose wisdom was as comforting as her freshly baked bread, stood waiting. Her kindly face, framed by silvering hair, was etched with concern as she took in the sight of the stranger beside Elias. Elias reined in the horses and climbed down, his body weary from the long day, but more so from the emotional toll. "Martha," he said, his voice softer now, "this is Elara. She'll be staying with us." Martha's gaze flickered from Elias to Elara, taking in the young woman's evident distress and fragility. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a deep well of compassion that Elias had come to rely on. "Welcome to Havenwood, child," Martha said, her voice gentle as a summer breeze. "You look tired. Come inside, let's get you settled." Elara flinched slightly at the direct address but offered no verbal response. Elias stepped forward. "Elara cannot see Martha," he explained quietly. "We'll need to make sure she's comfortable and safe." Martha nodded, her understanding immediate. She approached Elara's side of the buckboard. "Let me help you down, dear," she offered, her hand extended. Elara hesitated for a long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she allowed Martha to guide her. Together, the two women walked towards the house. Martha's comforting presence a stark contrast to the harshness Elara had known. Elias watched them go, a knot of complex emotions tightening in his chest. He had brought her here, but what now? How did one mend a spirit so deeply fractured? He unhitched the team, his movements methodical, the familiar chore a small anchor in the sea of uncertainty. Later, after Elara had been shown to a small, clean room, a room that had once been intended for a child, a room that held its own quiet sorrows for Elias, Martha sought him out in his study. "Elias," she began, her brow furrowed, "that poor girl. What happened to her in that terrible town?" Elias recounted the grim spectacle of the auction, his voice low and filled with a quiet rage. Martha listened, her expression growing sterner with each detail. "You did a good thing, Elias," she said firmly when he had finished. "A truly righteous thing. But she's like a wounded bird, terrified of every shadow." "I know," Elias sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She needs time, Martha. And kindness. Nothing more, nothing less. Treat her as a guest, ensure she wants for nothing, but give her space." "She's been handled enough," Martha nodded. "She barely touched the food I brought her. And this blindness, it's a heavy burden on top of whatever else she's suffered. We will make this a safe place for her, Martha," Elias said, more to convince himself than his housekeeper. Havenwood must live up to its name. That night, Elara lay in the unfamiliar softness of the bed, the clean scent of lavender from the sheets a foreign comfort. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there were no drunken shouts, no threatening presence looming outside her door. There was only the sound of crickets, the distant lowing of cattle, and the gentle sigh of the wind. Fear was still her closest companion, a cold shadow clinging to her heart, but beneath it, a tiny, almost imperceptible seed of something else began to stir. Was it curiosity? Or perhaps the faintest, most fragile flicker of hope? She maintained her guard, her pretense. It was her only shield, the only defense she had known. But as sleep finally claimed her, it was a sleep less tormented, a brief respite in the sanctuary of Havenwood. And in his own room, Elias lay awake, the image of Elara's bowed head and trembling hands imprinted on his mind, the silent question of her future and his role in it echoing in the quiet chambers of his heart. Days melted into weeks at Havenwood Ranch, each one a soft brushstroke painting a new, tentative layer over the harsh canvas of Elara's past. She moved through the house like a wraith, her footsteps barely audible, her presence often felt rather than seen. Martha Gable, with her innate kindness and gentle patience, became Elara's primary guide. She would lead Elara by the arm to the dining table for meals, describing the food placed before her in soft, encouraging tones. She helped Elara navigate the layout of the main rooms, her voice a constant, reassuring murmur. The settee is just to your left, dear, careful of the small table by the window, the hearth is warm, feel the glow? Elara's responses were minimal, often just a slight inclination of her head or a whispered thank you so faint it was almost carried away by the breeze. She ate little, but Martha persisted, preparing nourishing broths and soft breads, leaving small trays of fruit where Elara might find them. Elias, for his part, maintained a respectful distance, yet his awareness of Elara was a constant hum beneath the surface of his daily routines. He would observe her from afar, noting the way she'd tilt her head as if listening intently to sounds he barely registered, the distant call of a hawk, the rustle of leaves in the cottonwood trees, the intricate song of a meadowlark. He'd speak to her when their paths crossed, his voice calm and even, telling her about the day's work on the ranch, the health of the new foals, or the promise of rain in the clouds gathering over the western hills. He never pressed for conversation, never asked about her past. He simply offered his presence, a steady, non-threatening anchor in her new world. He wanted Havenwood to feel like a sanctuary, not another cage, however gilded. He noticed, with a growing sense of unease, small inconsistencies. Once, while he was mending a bridle near the porch where Elara sat, a field mouse darted from beneath a loose board. Elara gasped, a tiny, sharp intake of breath, and her head jerked almost imperceptibly in the direction of the fleeting movement, her supposedly sightless eyes widening for a fraction of a second before her composure returned. Another time, Martha had placed a vase of freshly picked wildflowers on the dining table, vibrant Indian paintbrushes and delicate bluebonnets. As Elara was guided to her seat, her hand, supposedly fumbling for the chair, brushed lightly against the petals, and Elias could have sworn he saw a flicker of something, recognition, appreciation, in her still features before the mask of blindness resettled. He said nothing to Martha or to Elara. These were fleeting moments easily dismissed. Perhaps he was imagining things, projecting his own desperate hope for her healing. Or perhaps the trauma she had endured had sharpened her other senses to an almost preternatural degree. Yet, the seed of suspicion, once planted, began to take root. He found himself watching her more closely, not with accusation, but with a deepening curiosity and a strange, protective sympathy. If she was feigning blindness, what terrible reason could she have? What horrors had driven her to such a desperate, all-encompassing deception? One quiet afternoon, Elias sat on the porch reading an old book of poetry his late wife, Mary, had cherished. Elara was nearby, seated in a rocking chair, her hands resting in her lap, the picture of serene sightlessness. A gentle breeze stirred the pages of his book, threatening to scatter them. Before he could react, Elara's hand, small and swift, shot out and pressed down on the fluttering page, stilling it. It was an instinctive gesture, perfectly aimed, executed with a precision that belied any lack of vision. She froze immediately, her hand retracting as if burned, her face suffused with a sudden, visible tension. Elias lowered his book slowly. Their eyes didn't meet, for hers were carefully averted, fixed on some indeterminate point past his shoulder. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. "Thank you, Elara," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "The wind can be quite mischievous here." She made no reply, but he saw the pulse beating rapidly at the base of her throat. He did not press the issue. He simply returned to his book, though the words on the page now seemed blurred, his thoughts consumed by the quiet young woman beside him and the profound mystery she embodied. He was beginning to understand that Elara's wounds were far deeper and her story far more complex than he could have ever imagined. The pretense of blindness was not merely a physical state, it was a fortress she had built around herself, brick by painful brick. And he sensed, with a growing conviction, that the key to her healing, to her true liberation, lay in finding a way to gently, patiently help her dismantle those walls when she was ready. The ranch, with its wide-open spaces and the quiet rhythm of its days, was offering her safety. Now he hoped it could also offer her the courage to be seen. The seed of Elias's suspicion, nurtured by small, almost imperceptible events, grew steadily into a conviction. Elara was not blind. The knowledge settled in his heart not with a sense of betrayal but with a profound and aching sorrow for whatever circumstances had forced such a desperate, soul-crushing charade upon her. He resolved not to confront her directly, not yet. Such a revelation had to come from her, in her own time, when the fragile tendrils of trust he and Martha were so carefully cultivating had grown strong enough to bear the weight of truth. Instead, he began to create small, subtle tests, not to expose her, but to understand the depth of her resolve and perhaps to gently nudge her towards a path of honesty. One sunny morning, as Martha was helping Alara to the breakfast table, Elias accidentally knocked a silver spoon from the table. It clattered onto the wooden floor, landing a few feet away from Alara's chair. "Oh, clumsy of me," Elias said, making a show of looking for it. Before Martha could retrieve it, Alara, who had been facing forward, subtly shifted her foot, nudging the spoon just enough so that it was within easier reach of where Elias was searching. Her head never turned. Her expression remained impassive. Elias retrieved the spoon, his heart clenching. "Thank you, Alara," he said softly, meeting Martha's slightly puzzled gaze with a calm one of his own. Martha, perceptive as she was, had also begun to notice these small, fleeting moments of incongruity, but she, like Elias, held her counsel, trusting his lead. Another afternoon, Elias found Alara sitting on the porch swing, a position she favored, the gentle motion seeming to soothe her. He approached, holding a small, brightly colored bird feather he'd found near the creek, a vibrant blue from a jay. "Alara," he said gently, "I found this down by the water. It's the most remarkable shade of blue, like the summer sky just after dawn." He held it out, not directly in her line of sight, but slightly to the side. He watched as her head tilted, her supposedly unseeing eyes aimed in its general direction. For a fleeting instant, he saw a minute tightening around her lips, a flicker in the depths of those carefully guarded eyes, as if she were processing the color he described, perhaps even seeing it. Then the veil descended again. "Blue is a peaceful color, Mr. Thorne," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. The tension within Elias grew, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. He knew the charade could not last forever, yet he dreaded the moment of its unraveling, fearing the pain it might cause her. The catalyst arrived unexpectedly, not as a grand, orchestrated event, but as a small, domestic crisis. One late afternoon, a storm, which had been brewing ominously in the western mountains, broke with sudden fury over Havenwood. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a banshee. Martha had gone to the root cellar to fetch some preserves, while Elias was in the barn checking on a restless mare. Alara was alone in the kitchen, ostensibly listening to the storm. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the old window above the kitchen sink, and with a sharp crack, a pane of glass fractured, sending a shower of tiny shards inwards, directly towards the spot where Martha often stood preparing vegetables. At that precise moment, the back door creaked open, and Martha, her arms laden with jars, stepped inside, heading straight for the sink. Alara, who had been seated at the small kitchen table, moved with a speed and certainty that was utterly breathtaking. "Martha, no!" Her voice, usually so quiet, rang out with startling clarity and urgency. Before Martha could take another step, before she could even register the danger, Alara was across the room. She didn't stumble, she didn't grope, she moved with the unerring grace of a dancer, her hands outstretched, not to feel her way but to intercept. She reached Martha just as the older woman was about to step into the path of the falling glass, her small body pushing Martha firmly backwards out of harm's way. Shards tinkled onto the floor where Martha would have been standing. For a moment, there was a stunned silence, broken only by the raging storm outside and Martha's shaky gasp. Then, the full import of what had just happened settled upon them. Alara stood frozen, her eyes wide, no longer veiled or downcast, but fixed on Martha's astonished face. The pretense shattered as surely as the window pane lay in iridescent fragments around them. Shame, raw and overwhelming, flooded Alara's features. Her hands flew to her mouth and a choked sob escaped her. She turned, her instinct to flee, to hide, overriding everything else. But Elias was there. He had entered through the back door just moments after Martha, drawn by the crash and Alara's cry, witnessing the entire, incredible scene. He stood in the doorway, blocking her escape, his expression not one of anger or accusation, but of profound, gentle understanding. "Alara," he said softly, his voice a calm anchor in the emotional tempest. She stopped, her shoulders hunched, her head bowed low, a torrent of silent tears tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. Martha, recovering from her shock, stepped forward, her hand reaching for Alara's arm. "Child," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "you saved me." Alara shook her head, unable to speak, the sobs now racking her small frame. Elias moved slowly towards her, his heart aching with a compassion so intense it was almost a physical pain. He gently took her trembling hand. "Alara," he repeated, his voice imbued with a quiet strength. "It's all right. You're safe here." He led her to the kitchen table, guiding her into a chair. Martha sank into another, her own composure shaken. The storm raged on outside, but within the small kitchen a different kind of storm was just beginning to break. "Why, Alara?" Elias asked, his tone devoid of judgment, only a deep, earnest need to understand. Why the charade? Why pretend you could not see? Elara lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes, now fully revealed, were the color of warm honey filled with a world of pain and fear. He made me, she choked out, the words torn from her. Silas. He said no one would want a wife who could see too much, who might question. He said it made me easier to control. More pitiable. Easier to sell. The confession hung in the air, heavy and devastating, painting a horrifying picture of her life before Havenwood, a life of calculated cruelty and unimaginable suffering. The raw, painful confession hung in the charged air of the kitchen, mingling with the scent of rain and broken glass. Silas Blackwood's calculated cruelty, laid bare in Elara's fractured words, sent a chill through Elias far colder than the storm raging outside. Martha Gable let out a soft, sympathetic sound, her hand instinctively covering her heart. Elias looked at Elara, truly looked at her perhaps for the first time, seeing not just the resilient survivor or the mysterious girl but the intelligent, perceptive woman who had been forced to dim her own light, to deny a fundamental part of her being, simply to survive. Her honey-colored eyes, now glistening with unshed tears but no longer veiled by deceit, held a depth of sorrow that tugged at his very soul. He forced you, Elias repeated softly, the words a confirmation, not an accusation. He made you live a lie. Every single day, Elara nodded, a fresh wave of tears spilling onto her cheeks. At first, it was just a way to make me seem less of a threat to him. He was always jealous, always suspicious. Then, when he grew tired of me, when he decided to get rid of me, he realized it made me more valuable in a different, terrible way. A blind wife was a novelty. Something to be pitted, easily managed, easily sold. Her voice was low, laced with a shame that was entirely undeserved. I was so afraid, she whispered, her gaze dropping to her tightly clasped hands. Afraid of him, of what he would do if I defied him. Afraid that if anyone knew I could see, they would think I was wicked, deceitful. That you would. Elias reached across the small table and gently, tentatively, covered her trembling hands with his own. His touch was warm, firm, a silent reassurance. Elara, he said, his voice earnest, there is no wickedness in you for trying to survive an evil you did not create. The deceit was his, not yours. You did what you had to do to endure. Martha, her composure regained, rose and began to quietly sweep up the shards of broken glass, her practical actions a counterpoint to the emotional intensity of the moment. That man, Silas Blackwood, she said, her voice tight with indignation, is the devil's own spawn. To do that to another human being, to his own wife. Elara flinched at the word wife. I was never truly his wife, she said, a flicker of her inherent pride surfacing. Not in my heart. I was his prisoner, and now you are free, child, Martha said firmly, meeting Elara's gaze with one of fierce maternal protection. Here, at Havenwood, you are free to be exactly who you are. With eyes wide open, a fragile, watery smile touched Elara's lips, the first genuine smile Elias had seen from her. It was like watching a flower, long pressed between the pages of a dark book, finally unfurl in the sunlight. But you knew, didn't you? Elara asked, looking at Elias. You suspected I could see. Elias nodded slowly. There were moments. Small things. But it wasn't my place to force your truth, Elara. It had to be yours to share when you felt safe enough. Safe, she repeated the word as if tasting it for the first time. I am beginning to understand what that word means here. With the truth finally out, a palpable shift occurred in the atmosphere of Havenwood. It was as if a heavy shroud had been lifted, allowing fresh air and light to permeate every corner. Elara, no longer burdened by the immense strain of her deception, began to unfurl like a spring blossom. Her movements became more fluid, more confident. Her eyes, bright and intelligent, took in the world around her with an almost ravenous curiosity. She marveled at the vibrant colors of Martha's flower garden, the intricate patterns of frost on the window panes in the early mornings, the majestic sweep of the hawk circling overhead. Elias found himself seeing Havenwood anew through her appreciative gaze. He began to actively teach her about the ranch, no longer filtering his explanations through the lens of her supposed blindness. He showed her the ledgers, explaining the business side of their operations, and was astonished by her quick grasp of figures and her insightful questions. He took her riding, not on a placid pony, but on a spirited but gentle mare. He watched, his heart swelling with a quiet pride, as she learned to handle the reins with a natural grace. Her laughter, clear and joyous, echoing across the pastures as she urged her horse into a gentle canter. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond the everyday workings of the ranch. Elias found himself sharing stories of his late wife, Mary, not with the sharp pain of fresh grief, but with a gentle melancholy, a bittersweet remembrance. He spoke of their dreams for Havenwood, dreams that had lain dormant for so long. Alara listened with a quiet empathy, her presence a comfort. In turn, she began to share more about her life before Silas, glimpses of a childhood that, while modest, had known kindness before he had entered her world like a blight. She spoke of her love for books, a passion Silas had ridiculed and forbidden. Elias, a lover of learning himself, immediately began to share his own small but treasured collection, reading aloud to her in evenings by the fireside and then patiently helping her to improve her own reading, which had suffered from years of neglect and furtive, stolen moments. A tender, unspoken affection began to weave itself into the fabric of their days. It was in the shared smiles over a new cab's clumsy antics, the comfortable silences as they watched the sunset paint the sky, the way their hands sometimes brushed, sending a spark of awareness through them both. Martha Gable observed it all with a knowing, benevolent smile. The lonely rancher and the resilient survivor were, slowly but surely, building not just a friendship but the foundations of a chosen family, a sanctuary built on truth, respect, and the quiet, burgeoning promise of love. Havenwood was no longer just a place of refuge for Alara, it was becoming her home in the truest sense of the word. And for Elias, her presence was beginning to fill the empty spaces in his heart, chasing away the long shadows of his solitude. The newfound peace at Havenwood, however precious, was always shadowed by the lingering threat of Silas Blackwood. Though perdition was a good day's ride away, Elias knew that a man like Silas, driven by greed and a venomous possessiveness, would not easily relinquish what he considered his property. Alara, despite her blossoming confidence and the joy she was rediscovering, lived with a quiet undercurrent of fear. A sudden shout from the ranch hands, the unexpected arrival of a stranger at their gate, or even a particular tone in a man's voice could send a flicker of apprehension across her face, a momentary return to the haunted look she had worn upon her arrival. Elias saw these fleeting shadows and his protective instincts, already strong, intensified. He could not, allow that darkness to touch her again. One evening, Ben Carter, Elias's steadfast and loyal foreman, rode in late from a supply run to a neighboring town, his weathered face grimmer than usual. He sought Elias out in the study where Elias and Alara were quietly reviewing the ranch accounts, a task Alara had taken to with surprising aptitude. Elias, Ben said, his voice low, I heard something in Oakhaven today. Some unsavory types asking questions. Describing a young woman, dark hair, pretty. Asking if anyone had seen her traveling with a quiet man on a buckboard a few weeks back. Elias's blood ran cold. He glanced at Alara, whose face had gone pale, her hand instinctively clutching the ledger. Did they mention a name? Elias asked, keeping his voice steady for Alara's sake. Ben nodded grimly. They mentioned Silas Blackwood. Said he was offering a reward for information leading to the return of his runaway wife. The air in the study grew thick with unspoken dread. Keep your eyes peeled for any strangers. And send word to Sheriff Brody in Redemption. Tell him what you heard. Tell him I expect him to uphold the law if Blackwood shows his face here with ill intent. Ben nodded. Will do, Elias. But you know Brody. He's more concerned with paperwork than justice sometimes. Might say it's a domestic dispute and wash his hands of it. Elias's jaw tightened. Ben was right. Sheriff Brody was a man who often chose the path of least resistance. Then we'll be prepared to defend ourselves, Elias stated, his voice quiet but resolute. Havenwood will not be breached. Over the next few days, an unspoken tension settled over the ranch. Ranch hands, fiercely loyal to Elias and increasingly fond of the kind and intelligent Alara, went about their duties with a new vigilance, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Elias began to subtly prepare Alara, not to frighten her, but to empower her. He taught her how to handle a small derringer he kept in his desk, showing her how to load it, aim it, and fire it. Her hands trembled at first, the cold metal a stark reminder of the violence she abhorred, but with Elias's patient guidance she mastered the basics, her determination fueled by the fierce desire to never be helpless again. He also showed her the hidden paths around the ranch, escape routes should the worst happen, and designated a rallying point deep in the wooded hills. If there's trouble, real trouble, and I'm not here, he instructed. You ride for the old trapper's cabin by Whisper Creek. You wait for me there. Promise me, Alara, she promised. Her eyes dark with a fear she tried to conceal, but also with a growing resolve. She would not be a passive victim. She would fight for her freedom, for the life she was building here with Elias. The peaceful interlude at Havenwood was undeniably over. The shadow of Silas Blackwood loomed large, a gathering storm on the horizon, threatening to sweep away the fragile sanctuary they had built. Elias and Alara found themselves drawn even closer, their bond forged not only in shared affection but now in shared peril. They knew the confrontation was inevitable. The only questions were when and how they would meet it. Every sunset brought a fresh wave of apprehension, every dawn a renewed sense of vigilance. The fight for Alara's freedom and for the soul of Havenwood itself was drawing inexorably nearer. The inevitable arrived on a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air was sharp and clean and the turning leaves painted the hills in hues of gold and crimson. A lone rider was spotted first, a speck on the distant horizon, growing steadily larger. Ben Carter, his weathered face taut, rode hard to the main house. Elias. Riders approaching. 3 of them. And one looks like he matches Blackwood's description. Elias, who had been discussing the winter fodder with Alara near the stables, felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, but his expression remained calm, his resolve hardening. He met Alara's wide, fearful eyes. "It's time," he said softly. "Remember what I told you. Stay close to Martha. And trust me." He squeezed her hand, a silent promise of protection, then turned to Ben. "Get the men ready. No violence unless they start it." But we stand our ground. Within minutes, Silas Blackwood and 2 brutish-looking companions rode into the main yard of Havenwood. Blackwood, his face flushed with arrogance and malice, scanned the ranch with a proprietary air. His eyes, small and cruel, landed on Alara, who stood on the porch, flanked by a resolute Martha Gable, her fear palpable but her chin held high. A sneer twisted Blackwood's lips. Well, he drawled, his voice carrying across the yard. "Look what we have here. My dear Alara, enjoying a little holiday, are we? Did you think you could hide from me, you deceitful wench?" Elias stepped forward, positioning himself between Blackwood and the porch, his stance deceptively relaxed but his eyes like chips of ice. "Blackwood," Elias said, his voice even but edged with steel. "You are not welcome here. This is private property. State your business, then leave." Blackwood scoffed. "My business? My business is her." He jabbed a thumb towards Alara. "She's my wife. My property. And she's coming with me." "She is no one's property, Blackwood," Elias retorted, his voice rising slightly. "And she is certainly not your wife in any true sense of the word. She stays here, where she is safe and respected." "Respected?" Blackwood let out a harsh laugh. "You bought her like a piece of livestock, Thorn. I will never go with you again." Blackwood's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed into slits of fury as he registered her direct gaze, her defiance. "So, the little blind mouse found her sight, did she? Or were you lying then too, you conniving little—" "Enough!" Elias's voice cracked like a whip. "You will not speak to her that way. You will not threaten her. Leave now, Blackwood, or you will be removed." Blackwood's companions, hulking figures with mean eyes, shifted uneasily, their hands moving towards the guns at their hips. Ben Carter and several Havenwood ranch hands, armed and ready, moved subtly into positions around the yard, their presence a silent warning. The tension was a coiled spring, ready to snap. "You think you and your farmhands can stop me, Thorn?" Blackwood snarled, his face contorted with rage. "She's mine, and I always get what's mine." He spurred his horse forward, intending to ride directly to the porch and seize Alara. In that instant, Elias moved. He was not a young man, but years of hard ranch work had kept him strong and agile. He stepped into the path of Blackwood's horse, grabbing the bridle with a powerful grip, forcing the animal to a jarring halt. "I said leave." Elias gritted out. Blackwood, enraged, swung a fist at Elias. Elias ducked, releasing the bridle, and Blackwood, unbalanced, tumbled inelegantly from his saddle, landing in the dust with a grunt. His 2 companions spurred their horses forward, drawing their weapons. But Ben Carter and the Havenwood men were faster. Warning shots rang out, kicking up dust near the hooves of the aggressors' horses, making them rear and shy. "Drop your weapons," Ben yelled, his rifle aimed steady. "This ain't perdition, boys. We do things different here." Blackwood scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. He lunged at Elias, a knife suddenly appearing in his hand. Alara screamed, a raw sound of terror. But Elias was ready. He sidestepped the clumsy attack, catching Blackwood's wrist, and with a swift, practiced move, twisted it sharply. The knife clattered to the ground. Blackwood howled in pain, clutching his injured arm. The fight was over almost before it began, decisive and brutal in its swiftness. Blackwood's companions, seeing their leader disarmed and outmatched by the determined Havenwood crew, slowly raised their hands, their bravado evaporating. Silas Blackwood, a bully and a coward at heart, looked from Elias's cold, determined face to the resolute men surrounding him and finally to Alara standing on the porch, no longer a cowering victim but a woman who had found her strength, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury that mirrored Elias's own. The fight had been short, but its impact was profound. The evil from Alara's past had returned, and it had been met not with fear, but with courage and unwavering solidarity. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation settled over Havenwood Ranch like the dust slowly resettling in the yard. Silas Blackwood, cradling his injured wrist, glared with impotent rage, his bravado extinguished, replaced by a sullen, venomous resentment. His two companions, thoroughly cowed by the determined show of force from Ben Carter and the Havenwood Ranch hands, stood with their hands still raised, their eyes darting nervously around. Elias Thorne, breathing a little heavily but otherwise unharmed, stood over Blackwood, his expression stern and uncompromising. "Ben," Elias said, his voice regaining its customary calm, "tie them up, all three of them. We'll take them to Redemption and hand them over to Sheriff Brody." This time, he'll have no choice but to listen. Alara rushed down the porch steps, her initial terror replaced by an overwhelming wave of relief and a fierce, protective concern for Elias. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her hand reaching for his arm, her eyes scanning him anxiously. Elias managed a reassuring smile, covering her hand with his own. "Just a bit winded, Alara. Nothing more. It's over. He won't hurt you again." The certainty in his voice was a balm to her frayed nerves. As Ben and the hands efficiently bound Blackwood and his cohorts, Martha Gable brought out water for Elias, her face a mixture of relief and lingering anger at the intruders. "Good riddance to bad rubbish," she muttered, nodding towards the captured men. The nerve of that man, thinking he could just ride in here and The journey to Redemption was swift and unceremonious. Elias, Ben, and two other trusted hands escorted the prisoners, leaving Alara in Martha's capable care, though her heart traveled with Elias every step of the way. When they arrived in town, Sheriff Brody, a portly man whose main concern usually revolved around disturbing his afternoon nap, was initially inclined to dismiss the matter as he had before. "Now, Elias," Brody began, looking skeptically at the bound men, "another domestic squabble? You know the law is a bit hazy on these things." But Elias cut him short, his patience worn thin. "This was no squabble, Sheriff," he stated, his voice like flint. "This was attempted abduction, assault, and trespassing with intent to cause harm. These men came to my ranch armed, threatened a woman under my protection, and attacked me when I told them to leave. My foreman and my men are witnesses. Alara Vance will testify to years of abuse and forced confinement at the hands of this man, Silas Blackwood." He gestured towards Blackwood, whose face was now pale with a dawning fear. "Furthermore," Elias continued, his voice ringing with authority, "Blackwood sold Miss Vance in an illegal auction in Perdition. I have witnesses to that as well. You can either uphold the law, Sheriff, and see these men prosecuted for their crimes, or I will take this matter to the territorial marshal. The choice is yours." Faced with Elias Thorne's unwavering determination, the clear evidence of Blackwood's injuries, the testimony of multiple witnesses, and the thinly veiled threat of involving higher authorities, Sheriff Brody's bluster deflated. He looked at Blackwood, then at Elias, and sighed. "All right, Thorne, all right. Lock 'em up, deputies," he grumbled, finally stirred to action. Silas Blackwood, his reign of terror finally at an end, was dragged towards the town jail, his protests and curses fading as the heavy door slammed shut behind him. His companions, looking utterly dejected, followed suit. The news of Blackwood's arrest and the true nature of Alara's plight spread through Redemption and the surrounding territories like wildfire. Any lingering whispers or judgments about Elias's purchase of Alara were silenced, replaced by admiration for his righteousness and compassion for Alara's ordeal. She was no longer seen as a mysterious or somehow complicit figure, but as a courageous survivor. When Elias returned to Havenwood, Alara met him at the gate, her eyes shining with unshed tears of gratitude and relief. The final, tangible link to her horrific past had been severed. She was truly, irrevocably free. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in glorious hues of orange and purple, Elias and Alara stood on the porch, watching the stars begin to prick the darkening canvas. A comfortable silence settled between them, a silence born of shared experience and a deep, unspoken understanding. Elias turned to her, his heart full. "Alara," he began softly, "Silas Blackwood will trouble you no more. You are safe here." Always she looked up at him, her honey-colored eyes reflecting the gentle light from the house. "Because of you, Elias," she whispered, "you gave me back my life. You showed me what true dignity and kindness mean." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. "And you, Elara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have brought light back into mine." The words hung in the air, a declaration more profound than any grand pronouncement. It wasn't a proposal in the traditional sense, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement of the deep, abiding love that had grown between them, a love forged in adversity and tempered by respect. In that moment, standing together under the vast, starlit sky, they both knew that Havenwood was more than just a ranch. It was the beginning of their shared future, a testament to the enduring power of hope and the profound beauty of a chosen family. The final chains of Elara's past had fallen away, and before her lay a path illuminated by love and the promise of a new dawn. The days following Silas Blackwood's arrest and imprisonment unfolded at Havenwood with a newfound lightness, a sense of peace so profound it was almost palpable. The shadow that had loomed for so long had finally lifted, allowing the true warmth and joy of the ranch to shine through. Elara, truly free for the first time in her adult life, blossomed. The tentative curiosity in her eyes was replaced by a vibrant engagement with the world around her. She rode across the pastures with Elias, her laughter echoing in the crisp air, her hair flying behind her like a banner of liberation. She immersed herself in the workings of the ranch, her keen intellect and quiet determination proving invaluable. She helped Martha in the garden, her hands, once forced to feign helplessness, now delighting in the feel of the earth and the satisfaction of nurturing new life. She pored over Elias's books in the evenings, her thirst for knowledge insatiable, her understanding of the world expanding with every page turned. The bond between Elias and Elara deepened, evolving from shared adversity and mutual respect into a quiet, steadfast love. It was a love built not on grand pronouncements or fiery passion, but on the steady accumulation of shared moments, understanding glances, and the comforting rhythm of their life together. It was in the way Elias would seek her out at the end of a long day, just to share a quiet moment on the porch, or the way Elara would anticipate his needs, a warm cup of coffee ready when he came in from the cold, his favorite passages marked in the book they were reading together. One sun-drenched afternoon, about a month after Blackwood's arrest, Elias found Elara by the creek that meandered through Havenwood, the same creek where he had once found the blue jay feather. She was sketching in a small notebook he had given her, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to capture the play of light on the water. He sat beside her, watching her for a moment, his heart swelling with an affection so powerful it almost stole his breath. "Elara," he said softly, his voice barely disturbing the gentle murmur of the creek. She looked up, her lips curving into a warm smile that always made his heart ache in the sweetest way. Elias, he took her hand, the one not holding the pencil, and looked into her clear, honey-colored eyes. "Elara Vance," he began, his voice a little unsteady, "you came to Havenwood as a stranger, seeking refuge from a terrible storm. You have brought sunlight into my life, into this home, in ways I never thought possible. You are brave and kind and intelligent, and you have shown me what it means to truly see the world again." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "And you, Elias Thorne," she responded, her voice thick with emotion, "you showed me what it means to be safe, to be respected, to be cherished. You gave me a haven when I had nowhere else to turn. You believed in me even when I was hidden behind a wall of fear." Elias squeezed her hand. "Havenwood is your home, Elara. But I was hoping you might also consider making your home with me. As my wife, my partner, my cherished companion in all the days to come." The question, so earnestly asked, hung in the sunlit air. Elara's smile widened and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. "Oh, Elias," she whispered, her voice filled with an overwhelming love. "There's nothing I would want more." And so, under the vast blue sky, by the gently flowing creek, they sealed their promise. Their wedding was a simple, heartfelt affair, held not in a stuffy church in town, but right there at Havenwood, in the meadow where the wild flowers bloomed in profusion. Martha Gable, her eyes shining with maternal pride, stood as Elara's witness, while Ben Carter, his weathered face crinkled in a rare, broad smile, stood by Elias. A few trusted ranch hands and their families, the people who had become their extended family, gathered to celebrate. Elara wore a simple dress of pale cream, her dark hair adorned with wildflowers, her eyes radiant with happiness. Elias, his heart fuller than it had been in years, looked at his bride and saw not just a survivor, but a queen in her own right, the mistress of Havenwood and the undisputed ruler of his heart. Life at Havenwood settled into a new, joyous rhythm. Elias and Elara worked side by side, their partnership extending to every aspect of the ranch. Her keen mind for figures helped streamline the accounts, while her gentle touch with animals was a wonder to behold. She planted a magnificent garden, a riot of color and fragrance, that became Martha's pride and joy. They filled the ranch house with laughter, with quiet conversations, and with the comfortable, easy love of two people who had found their soulmate in the most unexpected of circumstances. The themes of chosen family, dignity, and second chances were no longer abstract concepts. They were the very foundation of their life together, a daily testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of love. Their story, the tale of the lonely rancher and the blind girl he had saved, began to whisper through the territory not as a piece of scandalous gossip but as an inspirational legend of courage, compassion, and the enduring strength of the human heart. Havenwood, under their stewardship, became more than just a prosperous ranch. It became a beacon of hope, a symbol of what could be achieved when kindness and justice prevailed. The seasons at Havenwood turned, each one painting the landscape with its unique palette, each one deepening the love and strengthening the partnership between Elias and Alara Thorne. Years flowed into decades like the steady, unceasing current of the creek that had witnessed their pledge. The whispers of their story, once confined to the local territory, grew into a resonant legend, a tale told around campfires and in quiet parlors, a testament to the enduring power of compassion and the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. Havenwood itself flourished beyond measure, not merely in livestock or acreage, but in reputation. It became known far and wide as a place of fairness, a sanctuary where integrity was valued above all else and where every soul was treated with dignity. Elias, with Alara ever his wisest counsel and most steadfast partner, implemented practices unheard of in those times: fair wages for all their hands, education for their children, and aid for neighboring families who fell on hard times. Alara, her own experiences of suffering never forgotten, spearheaded initiatives to help those less fortunate, establishing a small fund from the ranch's profits to assist widows, orphans, and anyone cast adrift by the harsh realities of the frontier. Her garden, once a personal joy, expanded into a community resource, its bounty shared freely. Their home, once a place of solitude for Elias, echoed with the laughter of children, first their own, 2 sons and a daughter, each inheriting their father's quiet strength and their mother's perceptive spirit, and then, in the fullness of time, their grandchildren. These new generations grew up steeped in the foundational story of Havenwood, of a righteous act of salvation that had blossomed into an enduring legacy of love and justice. They learned that true sight came not from the eyes alone, but from the heart, and that the greatest wealth was not in land or gold, but in the bonds of chosen family and the courage to stand for what was right. Elias and Alara grew old together, their love a quiet, steady flame that warmed all who came into its glow. The lines on Elias's face, once etched with sorrow and solitude, were now softened by decades of shared joy and contentment. Alara's honey-colored eyes, which had once feigned blindness to survive, now held the wisdom of a life fully lived, a life dedicated to seeing and nurturing the good in the world. They would often sit on their porch in the evenings, much as they had in those early days, their hands clasped, watching the sun set over the rolling hills of their beloved Havenwood, a kingdom built not on conquest, but on compassion. The blind girl, sold by her drunk husband, was now a revered matriarch, her insight and kindness legendary. The lonely rancher was a patriarch respected not just for his prosperity but for his unwavering moral compass. Their story became a foundational myth of the region, a beacon that transcended the simple facts of their lives. Decades bled into a century and then another. Generations of Thorns and those inspired by their example continued to uphold the principles upon which Havenwood was founded. The ranch itself evolved, adapting to changing times, but its core values, dignity, justice, compassion, the sanctity of a chosen family, remained immutable, etched into the very soul of the land. Long after Elias and Alara Thorne had passed into memory, their spirits lived on, not just in their descendants, but in the enduring legacy of Havenwood. The tale was told and retold, each telling a reaffirmation of their profound impact. The exact number of years became less important than the timelessness of the message, that one act of courage, one extension of kindness, could ripple outwards through millennia, shaping destinies and inspiring countless souls. 5,320 years, or perhaps even more, might pass, and the world would undoubtedly change in ways unimaginable to that lonely rancher and the resilient young woman he had saved. Yet, the story of Havenwood, of the man who saw with his heart and the woman who taught a world the meaning of true sight, would persist. It became woven into the very fabric of human aspiration, a timeless reminder that even in the deepest darkness, the light of compassion could ignite a flame that would burn for ages, a testament to the enduring truth that love, when rooted in righteousness and nurtured by courage, could indeed build a haven that would last, in spirit if not in stone, for all time. The legacy of Elias and Alara was not just in the prosperous land or the thriving community they had fostered, it was in the enduring idea that every soul deserved a sanctuary, every heart deserved to be seen. And that true vision was the ability to recognize the inherent worth in another, a truth as potent and relevant across the unfathomable expanse of 5 millennia as it was on that dusty day in perdition. Their love story, an epic of the heart, echoed through the ages, a perpetual inspiration.